Thank you for joining us for ABNY's Controller Candidate Forum. Primary day is getting close. Starting to feel the footsteps of the day coming with more and more coverage. Obviously, most of that attention is around the mayoral's race, but the race for controller is critical to our city, especially now. So the controller, and it's always kind of shocking how people define this job. So I'll just say it's basically like our city's CFO, an independent watchdog that provides oversight of the city's budget and fiscal condition. It audits agencies to ensure accountability and make sure that the more than $250 billion in pension funds, money saved by our municipal workforce, is invested wisely and that it will be there for their retirement. So as we speak, Mayor de Blasio has a $98.6 billion budget in front of the council. For perspective, when he came into office, the size of the budget was $75 billion. So the next controller will play an essential role in ensuring that that money and the budgets of mayors to come is spent appropriately, efficiently, and without waste. The controller's office has a staff of over 800 people and has true independence and real teeth to serve as a counterweight to make sure that things are managed well in the city's finances. So we need to make a good decision. And the good news is we have distinguished candidates and we're going to learn a bit more about them today. I want to thank our moderator for today, Alan Van Capelle, our ABNY Foundation treasurer. His day job is leading the Educational Alliance as its president and CEO. For those who do not know Alan, he's a nationally recognized leader in the field of social justice, social service, and civil rights. At the Educational Alliance, he oversees a network of community centers that offer individuals and families high-quality, multi-generational programs and services that enhance their well-being and socioeconomic opportunities. And I want to say my late grandfather, Solomon Foreman, known as Sol, was a user on the Lower East Side a long time ago, the Educational Alliance services. So we love you and we love that place. I want to say thank you, Alan, for doing this, and zoom over to you.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And thanks, Melva, and thanks, ABNY. And thank you for watching this controller's debate. What's clear is that, as Stephen said, this is a very important time for our city. We're about to mount an epic comeback, and it's important to see who is going to help manage this city's finances. Even though we received $5.6 billion from the federal government, it may sound great, but beginning in 2023, it looks like we're going to have $4 billion in annual deficits to come. So how is the next controller going to ensure the fiscal health of the city? We asked them that question. We're also asking what specific initiatives or strategies or set of initiatives and strategies are they going to propose to help get our city back on track? So let's begin with Brian Benjamin. He serves in the New York State Senate, representing the Upper West Side and Harlem. He has said that rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse are among his top priorities. He knows this job because he chairs the Budget and the Revenues Committee in Albany. He plans to divest from fossil fuels. He wants to use earned income tax credits to invest in developing new income targets. And he's very much interested in affordable housing. So let's take it to Brian Benjamin and hear what he would do if he's elected New York City Comptroller.
I want to thank ABNY for inviting me to provide this video and for the organization's tireless efforts to renew and grow New York City's people, businesses, and communities. As we look to rebound from COVID-19, bring back tourism, hold the police accountable, all while keeping our community safe and bringing equity to how we invest in our diverse neighborhoods, it is incredibly important that we elect a comptroller who can make sure that there is transparency around all New York City spending and that we have data-driven decision-making that uses outcomes and results as key indicators for resource allocation. I'm running to be your next New York City Comptroller because I have the skills and the know-how to get the job done. The first responsibility of the comptroller is to protect the pensions of the retirees and invest the city's money responsibly. I'm the only candidate who has the relevant investment management experience to handle this position. Last year, the fund did not reach its required return of 7%, meaning that hundreds of millions of dollars had to be transferred to the fund that could have otherwise gone to important priorities that make our city the greatest and most competitive in the world, like fostering an international business hub, improving our city's transportation system, supporting small businesses, and improving the level of education for all of our children. Rooting out waste and protecting the pensions of retirees in the city's budget will be my top priority in office. We cannot afford to have a wasteful budget, and now is the time for serious action. The bottom line is this: we cannot afford to take a risk on a candidate with no finance and investing experience, especially with our city's finances in a compromised state. After earning a degree in public policy from Brown University, where I now sit on the board of trustees, and a master's in business administration from Harvard, I gained crucial insight into financial management by working as an investment advisor at Morgan Stanley, where I was responsible for asset wealth management, advising nonprofits and other for-profit institutions, as well as individuals, on how to best allocate hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. Through this position, I was able to hone my skill as an investment and financial advisor, skills that are crucial to understand as the city's chief financial officer, before deciding to apply my skill set for the greater public good. Working at a minority-owned real estate business development company, I helped create over 1,000 units of affordable and environmentally sustainable housing, all while helping young people develop work skills and secure good construction jobs through community youth programs. Managing a pension system valued at over $240 billion is central to the job, and I am the candidate who will be well prepared to step up to this task on day one. My own parents, who came to this country as Caribbean immigrants, are retired on city pensions, so ensuring that the returns for pensioners are maximized is a personal priority for me. I know that a strong return is possible while still maintaining a fund that reflects our values. In my first term as a state senator, I served as ranking member on the Senate Committee on Civil Service and Pensions, where I defended the public pensions of hardworking public servants, like my own parents, while ensuring the pension money was invested in a manner that reflected New York's values. I introduced legislation and worked with the state comptroller to divest the public pensions from private prisons. In the next session, I took it a step further and brought the fight to big private banks, introducing legislation that would disallow investment from any bank chartered in the state, and worked with Bank of America to end their relationship with private prison operators like Geo Group and Corsair. In 2020, I was able to pass the New York City Rainy Day Fund bill into law, allowing New York City to save funds in a revenue stabilization fund to prevent cuts to essential services during times of economic trouble. I currently serve as the chair of the Budget and Revenue Committee and as senior assistant majority leader in the New York State Senate. I will bring my experience not only in finance and investing, but also in accomplishing legislative goals to the office of the comptroller. With labor trustees at the table, I will make investment decisions that help build a city focused on working people. With an experienced financial manager as comptroller, the more than $240 billion pension fund gives the city a seat at the table and a voice that even the largest corporations cannot ignore. In addition to meeting our goals to divest from fossil fuels as quickly as possible, I will fight to ensure that future investments are targeted to match our values. I'll use economically targeted investments, ETIs, to invest in developing new income targeted affordable housing projects, as well as permanent supportive housing, to shift resources from temporary shelters for the homeless and to invest in stocks that meet environmental, social, and corporate governance standards. With a smart comptroller who understands the industry, we can get a double return for investments. First, a financial return for the pension holders, and second, an improved city, one where companies know that they have to center around working people because we are going to demand it with the power of this pension fund. Through utilizing the city budget for smart targeted investments led by an experienced financial manager, I will lead our city into a post-pandemic economy that is thriving and stronger than ever. By maximizing returns on our pension system, we will show that New York City is in its strongest financial state, giving us the ability to fund programs and initiatives that will foster an even stronger, more prosperous city for all. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you to Brian Benjamin, who clearly just made the case now that an experienced financial manager would be the right choice for New York City Comptroller. And now let's switch to Michelle Caruso-Cabrera, a well-known financial reporter who has reported on some of the biggest financial crises taking place all around the globe. She's traveling around these 5 boroughs, talking about bringing back people, jobs, and investments to our city in a post-pandemic world. Let's hear now from Michelle Caruso-Cabrera.
Hi, my name is Michelle Caruso-Cabrera. I'm running to be the next Comptroller of New York City. We need more women in power. I am the only Latina in the race, and as you will hear over the next few minutes, I'm the only candidate who has the relevant experience needed right now to be New York City's top financial officer and watchdog at this very critical moment for New York. I'm standing here in the middle of Times Square, which is just about a block from my campaign headquarters. And as someone who loves the city and who was here through the darkest days of the COVID crisis, it's really wonderful to see the city lighting up again, businesses reopening, the streets coming alive. There are thousands of people here in Times Square. Now, before entering politics, I was a journalist. I began my career 30 years ago at Univision and then spent more than 20 years at CNBC, where I was an anchor and the chief international correspondent. As a journalist, I reported on financial crises all over the world: Cuba, Iraq, Iran, Ukraine, Venezuela, Italy, Russia, Greece, all very different places. But in each situation, it was always the same. The most marginalized and underserved communities always end up paying the biggest price when disaster strikes. And it's happening here in New York, too. I'm very aware of the repeated mistakes that crop up over and over again in the management of both the economic crisis and also the subsequent recoveries. I'm very worried that without the right kind of leadership in this city, we could easily go down that same path. The population of the city in 1990 was smaller than it was in 1940. And that's because of the 70s. And if we do not get this election right, we could go back there again. I'm constantly telling people, yes, the city is resilient. It will bounce back. But how long it takes and how much damage we have to undo will depend on the actions that we take over the next 2 years. I'm sure you know that already. ABNY exists because of the crisis of the 70s. And I think the single most important thing I will do as comptroller is to look at every dollar we are spending, much as I used to do when I was a journalist. We have to make sure we are getting the best possible bang for our buck with how we spend taxpayers' money. Just to illustrate what I'm talking about. And another data point that I'm sure you are all familiar with. The city's budget has grown by $20 billion in the last 7 years, from $72 billion a year to $92 billion a year. And yet the New Yorkers I talk to from all walks of life, I would say every single one of them would struggle to identify $20 billion worth of improvements to their daily lives in the city or the quality of the services available to them. So what can the comptroller do about that? The comptroller can actually do the job. The comptroller is the city's chief financial officer and watchdog. A really high quality forensic audit will yield an enormous amount of information about the disconnect that I've talked about between spending and what we get for this and the lack of return, and allow us to spend wisely and invest in our communities as we emerge from this crisis. I know how to use income statements, balance sheets, and cash flow statements to extract the most valuable information, because in the right hands, they can be very powerful instruments, and I intend to make full use of them as comptroller. The office occupancy rate in Midtown Manhattan right now, where I am standing, it's still only roughly 16%. And while the shift to remote work is not permanent and may be even overstated and played out, it's still a very new phenomenon, and we could be looking at a long-term paradigm shift. Some of my opponents have actually called for a commuter tax, and that's when the city is desperate for workers to actually start commuting again and filling up the office buildings and patronizing all these local businesses that are suffering so much. Now, I know my bio is different than a lot of other candidates in the race for comptroller, and perhaps even a little unusual for someone seeking public office in New York City. But I believe my experience is precisely what makes me such a good fit for the office. Unlike many of my opponents in this race, I am not a career politician who's running for comptroller just because. I'm not looking for a place to park myself after being termed out of another office. I'm not looking for a citywide perch from which to launch an 8-year soft campaign for mayor. I have actual decades of experience following the money and investigating how it's being spent. And I believe I have the skill set and the experience and also the independence necessary to take full advantage of the powers and the responsibilities of this office and bring people, jobs, and investment back to New York City. That's why I'm running, and that's why I hope I have your support. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much.
And thanks so much to Michelle Caruso-Cabrera for that presentation. I noticed she was in Times Square, and from all of us at ABNY, our hearts and prayers and thoughts are with the victims of the shooting this past weekend. I also wanted to mention that we are hearing from all of the controller candidates today, and we're doing so in alphabetical order. So in case you're wondering in which order they were selected, they are being done in alphabetical order today. Let's go to the next candidate. His name is Zack Isco, and Zack stepped in to help with COVID-19 relief efforts at the Javits Center, and he quickly rose to become the deputy director there, working to coordinate the nurses and the doctors. He has traveled around this city saying that he would aggressively audit the city's finances in order to find savings. He says we need to be sure to know where every single dollar is going in our city budget. He's also said on more than one occasion he thinks that we can raise more money without raising taxes. Let's see Zack's presentation and see how he would go about doing it.
Hi, my name is Zach Iscol. I'm running for comptroller here in New York City. Bottom line, if we're going to solve our budget crisis in the long term, it is pretty simple math. We need to start spending less, and we need to be able to raise more. And I believe we can raise more without even raising taxes, just by getting people back to work. New York City spends almost $95 billion a year. This is more than almost the next 20 largest US cities combined. It is an astronomical amount of money. For the amount that Mayor de Blasio has actually increased the budget by about $20 billion a year, we could have made city colleges free, and we could have had free public transportation. Think about that. So how do we actually end up spending less? We could reinstate the program to eliminate the gap for city agencies to identify 3 to 5% in savings a year. That doesn't even require cutting the city's workforce. There are massive savings to be found just on the programmatic side and by building in greater government efficiencies. There are economies of scale that could be applied to procurement, to healthcare costs. Even something as simple as creating a robust base map of all city infrastructure, something that we don't have in digital format. Believe it or not, that alone would achieve 5% of savings on city projects. We spend more than almost every major US city combined on homelessness, yet we get worse results. We've learned that a large number of NYCHA roofs were replaced without checking the warranty. That happens all the time in NYCHA. As the city's chief fiscal watchdog, I would aggressively audit to find savings, to find areas of savings, to call attention to them, to get them addressed. When I ran Headstrong, a nonprofit provider of mental health care for veterans across the US, 85 cents on every dollar went to providing services, not to overhead. We need to ensure that same level of accountability in our city budgets. We need to know where every dollar is going and ensure that it is tied directly to outcomes. That's how you would identify efficiencies. The list is endless in the places to find these savings and efficiencies. So how do we raise more? Well, we can do this by getting New Yorkers back to work. So as comptroller, one of the things I've proposed is issuing $10 billion in a social impact bond to help building owners retrofit their buildings to come into compliance with local law 97, which is around energy efficiencies. You get paid back based on energy savings. This would also create 150,000 jobs. I'd start a 5-borough investment fund to start getting more of the pension fund invested locally here in New York City. Great model at New York State that does it. It's led to a 10% IRR, tens of thousands of jobs, investing in hundreds of business across the US. Bottom line, we need leadership that is not antagonistic to the business community, but who embraces the business community, the private sector as a vital part of our city's civic life and our city's recovery. The reality is that New York City has all of the tools it needs to close the gap in our budget. We just need the leadership in the city that's willing to get that job done. How does that happen? By getting out the vote on June 22nd. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. And an interesting idea about a 5-borough investment fund and making sure that the city's very large 5 pensions are invested within the 5 boroughs. Now let's go to take a look at somebody who knows a lot about the 5 boroughs because he represents all of them as Speaker of the New York City Council. Corey Johnson represents Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen, and the West Village. In the New York City Council in 2017, just after his first term, his colleagues elected him Speaker. He's been a real cheerleader for this city, and now he wants to do so as Comptroller. If elected, he'll be the first openly gay person elected citywide. Let's hear from Speaker Corey Johnson.
Good morning. I'm Corey Johnson, Speaker of the New York City Council, and candidate for New York City Comptroller. It's an honor to be back in front of the Association for a Better New York today. Government and the private sector must work together to bring our city back. To put simply, we need your help. Our city is in crisis, and we need all hands on deck. And while we may not always agree on every issue, you all know that my door is always open to smart, experienced, and committed New Yorkers like you all. The good news is that we don't have to do it alone. Washington is no longer telling our city to drop dead. Thanks to President Biden and our leaders in Congress, especially Majority Leader Schumer, New York City will be getting at least $5.9 billion in direct emergency relief funds. That will undoubtedly help. But it's up to leaders in our city government to use those funds responsibly and to get our recovery done right. From this time of great uncertainty, it is clear that New York City needs strong and proven leadership, leaders with experience, leaders who know the budget inside and out, leaders who have spent years making tough decisions and getting things done. As the next comptroller of the city of New York, that's exactly what I will bring to the table. Just look at my record. I've negotiated 3 balanced and on-time, multi-billion-dollar city budgets, and I'm halfway through my 4th. I was the lone voice fighting for additional budget reserves during the boom times before the pandemic struck. And I got it done, securing $475 million in budget reserves that helped us weather the storm of the past year. I created the first ever capital budget subcommittee at the council, adding more oversight and transparency to major infrastructure projects. I pushed the de Blasio administration for more specific units of appropriation in the budget, which provide greater accountability in how city agencies spend taxpayer money. And when the COVID crisis hit, I led the council to pass bills that protected the public's health and supported small businesses. My work as a public servant is guided by the motto I learned from my mom growing up: do the most good for the people who need it the most. I've kept that motto in mind while crafting my policy agenda for the Comptroller's office. The document is called Do the Most Good, a blueprint for New York City's recovery. This blueprint offers up concrete plans related to the key responsibilities facing New York City's next comptroller. I'm going to make sure that every dollar we get for COVID relief is targeted directly to our recovery and the New Yorkers who need it the most. I will lead aggressive and impactful oversight and audits over all 145 city agencies and our city's $98 billion budget. I'm committed to utilizing the Comptroller's Audit Bureau to identify waste, inefficiencies, and misguided policies. I'm going to protect our 5 pension funds so that the 700,000 current and former city employees who rely on those $251 billion in pension funds can feel confident that their hard-earned benefits will always be there. With the professional staff in the Comptroller's Bureau of Asset Management, I'll work in partnership with the pension fund trustees, take a hard look at the billions of dollars that the pension funds are currently losing in high fees and below market returns. Through economically targeted investments, I will support the creation of affordable housing, good jobs, small businesses, and green infrastructure here in New York City. And I'll create a new ETI initiative called the Climb Fund, a partnership I'm proposing between the city and private investors to provide low-cost financing for small, minority-owned businesses. I will use the tools of the Comptroller's office to get transparency and accountability for New Yorkers with a new database of audits, claims, efficacy, and settlements called ACEs. This new database will allow New Yorkers to take a closer look at inefficiencies and inequities and how taxpayer money is spent. I will prioritize racial and gender equity to increase support for minority and women-owned business enterprises and ensuring citywide pay equity. And finally, I'll support the working people of our city by strictly enforcing our wage laws and developing our workforce for the economy of tomorrow. To put it simply, I will use the powers and duties of the Comptroller's office to improve the lives of all New Yorkers because I love this city so much, just like I know all of you do. During my first month as speaker, I spoke to you all at an ABNY breakfast, and I said this, quote, "The world is moving too quickly for us to be mired in petty political squabbles and bickering. Polarization is no substitute for policy, and playing political games will doom our efforts before they even begin. Nearly 4 years later, after a once-in-a-lifetime global pandemic and a devastating economic crash, my message to you is the same. Let's work together. Our city works best when we have a fair and inclusive economy, when we're creating jobs and lifting New Yorkers out of poverty. And in the coming months and years, I hope to work with all of you to make that a reality in New York City, the greatest city in the world. Together, we can rebuild our city better and stronger than before. Thank you, Stephen Rubenstein, and thank you to all you all at ABNY. I look forward to working together.
And thank you to Speaker Johnson for his vision about how he would use the Office of Comptroller to help everyone in our New York. Now let's hear from Councilmember Brad Lander. He started off in the Fifth Avenue Committee before getting elected to a council seat once held by Mayor Bill de Blasio. He has said that he is going to create a special investment fund to help create jobs in New York and build and get businesses back and thriving again post-pandemic. I want to hear more about that, so let's hear now from Brad Lander.
Hello, ABNY members. I'm Councilmember Brad Lander, and I'm running for Comptroller to secure a just recovery for New York City. This pandemic has left millions of our neighbors struggling to pay rent, find work, and keep their businesses open. And it's also opened up a multi-billion-dollar dent in the city's budget. Now, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, our budget is in better shape than we feared, but we still have critically important choices to make. The job of the Comptroller is to take the long-term view, to ensure that we're spending wisely, to invest in ways that stimulate recovery, and to make sure that we're better prepared for future crises than we were for this one. The city is set to receive $6 billion in direct federal aid, $6 billion for our public schools, and around $1 billion more through 100% FEMA reimbursement. Together with hiring attrition, that means our budget will be balanced for FY21 and FY22, but multi-billion-dollar gaps remain in the out years. So we need to make sure that this one-time influx of funds is used smartly to help our city recover, to build a platform for better shared economic growth, to address issues of inequality, and to prepare for future risks, all while not creating recurring spending obligations. First, we need to start right now with planning to get our schools open safely and supportively next fall by giving our principals the resources they need to bring their teachers and students back with more social, emotional, and academic supports so families come back. Through one-time support for the arts and culture sector, for our small businesses, and for not-for-profit organizations, we can bring back the creativity and community that sustains all our neighborhoods. And we should use some of those funds to create a public health, care, and climate corps to create time-limited public jobs that help our city recover from COVID-19 and address other public health crises, including gun violence, obesity, and climate change. We should also use one-time funding to make infrastructure investments that create jobs now, confront the challenges we're facing, and lay the foundation for the next generation of businesses to grow and thrive here. That includes acquiring closed hotels for conversion to supportive housing and ramping up our affordable housing program overall with a focus on permanently affordable social housing, including a 21st century version of Mitchell-Lama co-ops. It includes acquiring distressed commercial property on the model of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, a platform for sustainable innovation and entrepreneurship. And we should use some of it to make investments in renewable energy. I'm proposing to create Public Solar NYC to install 25,000 solar panels on our rooftops, creating thousands of good green jobs. Now, all that spending must happen with one sharp eye on what will bring stimulative opportunity to our city and the other on ensuring that we don't create programs that we can't sustain in the future. Too many of Mayor de Blasio's savings have been smoke and mirrors, but the current attrition program is actually reducing headcount. So going forward, we should build on it with a program of focused attrition where commissioners identify programs that can be phased out. We should push Albany to reform our broken and inequitable property tax system. As part of that reform, we should end the 421A tax break, which gives away $1.7 billion every year for overwhelmingly market rate housing and requires not a single unit cheap enough to help a homeless New Yorker get off the streets. We should reduce our bloated police budget from the $11 billion we're currently spending, as well as the Department of Corrections budget, where spending per detainee is now $500,000 a year, more than double what we spent in 2015. And we can save hundreds of millions more by tackling the root causes of city settlements, especially police misconduct and traffic crashes. And finally, we must establish a true rainy day fund so we are better prepared for the next crisis. We should start with a contribution of at least $1 billion now, and then make annual deposits as recommended by the Citizens Budget Commission to move toward that goal of having at least 15% of our tax revenue in reserve. In my decade in the City Council, I've focused on innovative uses of data to make government more effective, from establishing a tracking system to save billions on capital projects to prioritizing transit signal modernization. My campaign has put forward detailed proposals to invest responsibly, get more out of our infrastructure spending, take a more proactive approach to auditing that will drive real change beyond just gotcha headlines. Look, I'm a progressive, and I want bold government action to help us recover from this crisis and build a more just and equal city. But I also know government has to work better to be able to deliver on those promises. As comptroller, I'll take on the major crises facing our city now and help us prepare better for the ones to come. Thank you.
And thanks to Councilmember Brad Lander, and nice to hear about a rainy day fund. I think the first candidate so far to talk about one. Now let's hear from another candidate, a first-time person running for office. Her name is Terri Liftin. Terri spent the last 14 years as the chief legal officer for investment firms here in New York. Terri's been talking a lot during this campaign about the need to work with chambers of commerce to examine the burdens that New York City business has been under post-pandemic. She also has been talking about trying to figure out how we can better manage the city capital funds and ensure that there's proper oversight. She thinks that the role of the comptroller might have something to do about it. So let's take a moment now and meet Terri Liftin.
Hi, my name is Terri Liftin, and I'm running for New York City Comptroller. Thank you to ABNY for organizing this forum. New York is facing a critical moment, and the selection of the right civic leaders is crucial for both the short and long-term health and vitality of our city. While the relief provided under the President's federal aid package will help close the current budget gap, there is a real risk that the money will be wasted, spent on recurring and unnecessary expense items if our leaders prioritize short-term political headlines over long-term prosperity. And therefore, budget gaps starting in 2023 will in fact materialize. I believe the fiscal health of New York City depends on controlling costs and generating revenue. As comptroller, my direct role is in the area of controlling costs. I will do the following. I will invest the city pensions in investments with the best risk-adjusted returns rather than prioritizing social screens. We need to earn a rate of return that matches the obligation to retirees. If not, this becomes a real tax cost because the city uses taxpayer dollars to fund the gap, which is in the billions. We need to ensure that the city's debt finance capital projects, currently 24 agencies, have these projects, over $125 billion in debt outstanding. We need to make sure these projects are well managed and there's proper oversight to the same extent as expense spending. Our taxpayers currently pay billions a year in debt service. And finally, perhaps most importantly, I will eliminate waste by doing thorough and effective audits. No more burying the costs in miscellaneous agencies. No more other lines for contract spending. We need to move past gotcha press reports and releases and audit reports that no one reads. When I audit, I will start with costs that have increased and past deficiencies. Outstanding problems need an escalation procedure. Each agency needs a responsible person in charge of reporting back on the audits, whose name will be on the audit reports along with the mayor, speaker, and council. In the end, I will require agency accountability by focusing on what matters and working together to eliminate waste. We need honest and transparent accounting, so then we can have a clear revenue position so we can support the initiatives we need. 3 initiatives that I support. The first is to help businesses that were not able to leverage a digital infrastructure during COVID. These are our small businesses, our local retailers. They are strangled by bureaucracy. They're harassed, they're fined and taxed, and then burdened by more regulation. These businesses have never had a true voice, and they've really suffered over the last year. Specifically, I will work with each chamber to examine the financial burden of a typical small business in each borough, and then unwind the unnecessary, expensive, and burdensome regulation. 2, we need to bring back our human talent pool back to New York City. There's no question that people left and they will continue to leave. We need our workers to move back, and we need our non-resident workers to start commuting. This will only happen if quality of life returns. This means our health, our safe streets, reliable transportation, and for those who are considering moving back, predictable and functioning schools. It may sound simple, but once again, we need our leaders to be honest about what is going on and the problems we face. We're not going to move forward if we pretend that crime isn't an issue or that the rich don't matter. I will ensure these areas get the attention they deserve. And finally, jobs. The challenge will be to make sure everyone can participate in the recovery so it is equitable and sustainable. We need an infrastructure to match labor needs with educational and skill requirements. Currently, there are over 300,000 job openings, but the bad news is that those who are out of work don't have the skills or required education level. The city cannot continue to be the default employer for those with a high school diploma. Employers need to be encouraged to hire qualified candidates with vocational training or specialized licenses. Not every job requires an Ivy League degree. CUNY has been a leader in this area, partnering with the private sector to provide apprenticeships and internships that provide real experience, mentoring, and networking. This is upward mobility for students and graduates. The city needs to encourage this type of public-private partnership, and I will do that as comptroller. Thank you.
And thanks to Terri for that presentation. Our next presentation is from Senator Kevin Parker of Brooklyn. Kevin is the 5th ranking Democrat in the state Senate. Senator Parker has been saying throughout this campaign that we need an equitable recovery in New York City. He says that has to include a mix of public and private partnerships. He says that we need to build jobs in New York, and those jobs have to pay a living wage with benefits that come from jobs like clean energy. And he says that he wants to work with institutions across the city. To find out more about what Senator Parker means, let's hear directly from him.
Hi, I'm State Senator Kevin Parker, and I want to thank ABNY for giving me this opportunity to talk with you today. Let me start by telling you a little bit about myself and why I'm the right person to be the next city comptroller. I'm a lifelong New Yorker who grew up in NYCHA, the Bushwick houses, and went to Brooklyn public schools my entire life. I have the most government education of any candidate in this race. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in government. I did a fellowship with MIT, and I will soon be working on a PhD at CUNY. I also have the most practical experience of anyone in the race. I worked in the chairman's office of UBS Payne Weber. I worked in the state comptroller's office and the State Urban Development Corporation. As well, I served in the state Senate for over 18 years, much of which was spent overseeing the fiscal health of the state on the Senate Finance Committee. Now, what have I done as senator? I've passed over 70 bills, making me one of the most accomplished legislators in Albany's history. I'm the majority whip, and I've promoted the clean energy economy and affordable broadband as the chair of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. I've passed legislation to help MWBEs and created educational opportunity centers at SUNY schools. Now, why am I running? Because we need an equitable recovery. A recovery in the city that includes economic justice through public and private partnerships. An economic recovery is inevitable, but we need a recovery where we lift all boats. Now, the most important way that happens is through jobs. The second is through jobs, and the third is through jobs. And not just any jobs, but jobs that pay a living wage with benefits. Now, what will I do as City Comptroller? My first day in office, I'll create an Economic Justice Council, a group of the city's brightest minds from the public and private sector, labor, and community stakeholders who will develop a policy platform neighborhood by neighborhood. It'll be like the World Economic Forum for the city, and ABNY can expect a call when I'm selecting members. I'll promote the clean energy economy that'll create good paying jobs that can be done socially distanced. I'll partner with CUNY and the Department of Small Business Services to create small business development centers at every CUNY campus. And I'll increase the city's MWBE utilization and invest more pension dollars in our small businesses. Now, how will I do it? I'm not just going to use the Comptroller's office as a bully pulpit. I'll keep pushing legislation even as Comptroller. I'll lobby the City Council and even have an active office in Albany. It's like you're getting a Comptroller, a councilman, and a senator all in one. You guys understand business. Where else can you get a deal like that? The Comptroller's office will be like it was in the days of the Board of Estimate. So thank you for your time, ABNY. And on June 22nd, I hope to win your vote, even your second or third choice vote. Now, to find out more, please visit kevinparker2021.com. Thank you again.
Thanks to Senator Kevin Parker. Now let's meet Reshma Patel. Reshma Patel was a driving force behind a new financing authority in New York City called the New York City Transitional Finance Authority. She also says she wants to create an economic recovery from the bottom up, and she wants to direct some of those funds that we receive from the federal government to the art scenes to bring back tourists in New York. Let's hear more from this candidate for New York City Comptroller. Her name is Reshma Patel.
Hello, my name is Reshma Patel. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with ABNY today. I'm running for New York City Comptroller because as we rebuild New York City post the COVID-19 pandemic, we need new voices to come to the table. We need someone who understands community needs, but also has technical expertise in this role. I have over 18 years of experience working in public finance, where I helped finance over $40 billion of critical capital projects. I served as the city's financial advisor for 8 years and know the nuts and bolts of the Comptroller's office. I currently serve as vice chair of Manhattan Community Board 6's Budget Committee, and I served as board co-chair of Chaya Community Development Corporation in Queens. Having worked on the city's finances during prior economic downturns, I know this recovery will need a multifaceted approach. The American Rescue Plan will help the city balance its budget in FY 2022 and most likely FY 2023. But we need to use this federal aid strategically to avoid budget shortfalls in future years. My first priority as we rebuild New York City is to take an approach from the bottom up, not the top down. We need to create equitable economic growth that is centered on those who have suffered the most from this pandemic: BIPOC New Yorkers, immigrants, and women. To do this, I will focus on making capital available to small businesses in these communities, job creation, and skills retraining. We need our communities to be on stable economic footing for the long-term financial health of our city. New York City will need to shore up revenues to pre-pandemic levels to avoid future budget shortfalls. People choose to live and visit New York City because of its vibrant art scenes and unique restaurants. I would focus on directing aid to these areas to bring residents and tourism dollars back to New York City. Our post-pandemic economy will look different. I will provide incentives for companies that are creating an economy of the future, whether that be through clean energy, vertical farming, blockchain, or biotech. I will work to create a New York City that brings startups and new businesses in. About 1/3 of all New York City small businesses have closed during this pandemic. Even before the pandemic, in many parts of the city, commercial vacancy rates were near 20%. It is vital to save small businesses that are essential for our communities to flourish. I support a vacancy tax that would encourage landlords not to keep storefronts empty so that space is used by businesses that generate sales tax revenue. We also need cuts on the expenditure side to avoid out-year budget shortfalls. I would change the way we do audits of the city's agencies. I would require we collect both qualitative and quantitative data on an ongoing basis to assess the public value of each program. During this process, we would also evaluate programs across agencies and contracted service providers to look for where we can eliminate redundancies to cut cost. Debt service is a $7 billion line item in our budget. I would undertake restructurings of the city's outstanding debt while interest rates are low to generate savings in future budget years. We also need to reduce the nearly $1 billion the city pays in claims settlements annually. Much of this is from traffic accidents and improper policing. I would look to make improvements in both of these areas to reduce claim settlements significantly. These are just few of the steps we can take to avoid future budget shortfalls. I would be happy to discuss more ideas with you on how we come out of this pandemic a more innovative, a more sustainable city, better prepared for whatever comes our way. Thank you for your time today, and I would love to get your support.
And thanks so much to Reshma Patel for that presentation. A vacancy tax rate is an interesting idea I heard from her. But now let's hear what Assemblyman David Weprin has to say. David Weprin serves in the New York State Assembly for the 24th Assembly District. He chairs the Corrections Committee. He's running for Comptroller, and he's been saying for the last several months that he will increase the rate of audits in the Comptroller's office. He thinks that's a way to save money. He also wants to open mini Comptroller's offices in every single borough that he's going to call economic empowerment centers. Now, Assemblyman David Weprin to talk to us about that and other things he would do if he's elected New York City Comptroller.
Good morning. My name is David Weprin, and I'm running to be the next New York City Comptroller. I wanted to start by thanking my good friends, Stephen Rubenstein, Melva Miller, and everyone at ABNY for inviting me to participate in this virtual event. For decades, ABNY has been an important leader in promoting a civic dialogue on critical policy issues facing New York City. And make no mistake, now more than ever, we need this conversation. As our city begins to open back up again, we know we are facing the worst financial crisis in our city's history. While federal aid is going to reduce a heavy burden, there is still a lot of work to do. It is imperative at this time that we have a comptroller who is ready on day one to help get New York City back on track. I'm the only candidate with the relevant finance experience, both in the private and public sector, to do that. I served as the Deputy Superintendent of Banks under Governor Mario Cuomo, where I was the watchdog of $2 trillion in assets. I served as the finance chair of the New York City Council for 8 years, where I balanced the budget during 2 financial crises. I have 25 years in municipal finance, funding critical capital projects, and now I have been a member of the New York State Assembly for 11 years. As comptroller, I will make sure that New Yorkers' tax dollars are being spent appropriately. Right now, the comptroller is only required to audit some aspect of each city agency once every 4 years. I will increase the rate of audits to once every year, allowing us to have a clear sense of how our taxpayer dollars are being spent. Specifically, we need to target outside city contracts. Nearly 20% of the city's $92 billion budget is spent on outside contracts, where we know there is repeated waste and fraud. In the Department of Education alone, $8 billion is spent on outside contracts, when in fact, much of that money should and could be redirected back into the classroom. And I promise to serve all New Yorkers. We are a 5-borough city, and we need to have a 5-borough comptroller's office. I commit to open an office in every borough. These offices will serve as community economic empowerment centers where working and middle-class New Yorkers can improve their financial literacy, gain access to financial institutions, and increase their access to economic opportunity. In nearly 20 years in public service, I think you would agree that I have always been a straight shooter with voters and with business advocacy organizations such as ABNY. My career in municipal finance and government has led me to this point. As a comptroller for all New Yorkers, I will understand the need to balance the budget while using the largest city's financial resources to their fullest to benefit the residents of today and tomorrow. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I look forward to hearing from you all soon.
Well, thanks to Assemblymember David Weprin, and thanks to all 9 candidates for joining us in this ABNY Comptroller Forum. In a very uncertain year, what is certain is that never before has the office of Comptroller been more important than it will be in the years ahead. So think well, New York, about who you want to represent you in that very important office. The election is June 22nd. You can pick up absentee ballots and vote early. Make sure you vote. Thanks so much for joining us. From all of us at ABNY, have a great afternoon.